And it was just part of the mechanism of my brain's use of sugar as a way to keep me stuck in this looping pattern of thoughts that sabotaged my ability to be grateful with life and be connected to life. And, when I again, this idea of, well, what is it about rock climbing that did whatever it did biologically, having the ability to, in the moments of life that I am about to take an action that doesn't serve me, to have the ability to notice the relationship between my mind and my nervous system in that moment and use my nervous system to teach my brain to be okay, to feel safe, to feel loved. That's what changed my relationship to sugar. It's what changed my relationship to everything in life. But it required me being very mindful of the moments my brain was trying to create a stress response.
Welcome to the Wake Up with Gratitude podcast, where we share new and different ways to practice gratitude that you might not have thought of before. Our guests come from many different and diverse backgrounds, and the one thing they all have in common is a passion for gratitude. I'm Julie Boyer, a gratitude and gut health expert, and I love showing you different ways to practice gratitude that you might not have thought of before. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so grateful that you're here. I love that you are listening to this podcast episode with Adam Hart because we have a really beautiful conversation about gratitude. He leads us through a beautiful breathwork exercise, and he also shares how he overcame his sugar addiction, which, if you know me, you know it's something I've struggled with for many years. So I'm excited to download his 6-step process to help me work through my own sugar addiction. You can grab that free download yourself in the podcast notes. Before we start this episode with Adam, I invite you to share this podcast with someone in your life that is struggling with an addiction and would love to reconnect back to being present and connecting back to their breath. Adam helps us to do this in a simple way and reminds us that these moments in time that we spend being grateful and being connected are truly the beautiful moments that make up a wonderful life. One more quick thing. Have you had a chance to rate the podcast on your favorite app? It takes just a quick moment to give this podcast a 5-star rating. And what that does is it helps other people see this podcast when they're looking to listen to a podcast about gratitude. Thanks, friend. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. No more time to waste. Let's get into this interview with Adam Hart. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Wake Up with Gratitude podcast. I'm your host, Julie Boyer, and today I'm welcoming Adam Hart to the podcast. Hello, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Julie.
It's so neat how Adam and I have all these great connections. And if you haven't met Adam yet, Adam is an international speaker and personal transformation coach whose mission is to help as many busy parents as possible enhance the daily quality of their life for themselves and their families. Adam's passion for sharing his knowledge has led to over 400 plus speaking engagements and the creation of his successful coaching programs. Adam also authored a best-selling book called The Power of Food, which highlights his personal journey with turning his sugar addiction into a powerful source of love. Adam, I feel like we could talk about so many things, and I know that gratitude is also a really important part of your journey. But as I love to start the podcast, I would just invite you to share some of your story with our podcast audience.
Yeah, well, I appreciate being with you today for sure. And I think the main theme of my story is this. I don't know the analogy to put, but just coming from that place of really struggling in terms of how life is unfolding, and then finding that light. And when I found my light, it kind of put me on this path where life became more grateful. Everything around me became filled with gratitude. And so I think there's a pathway to doing that. That's a lot easier than we're being told. And that's my mission, is to keep spreading the word on how we can work with our nervous system. And I think we're going to dive into this, but that was my big aha moment when I discovered the power of my own stress response and how I could shift the way that my mind was functioning changed everything.
So tell me a little bit about how you got into this business. I know, you started sort of the nutrition realm was where you began, and then you became a coach and created this incredible business. So tell us that story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had occupational burnout in my 20s, living with ADHD, diagnosed learning disabled, medicated as a child. And as I got into the working world, had all the adult stressors on top of my self-esteem and self-worth thoughts. And all of a sudden I got to that point where I was pre-diabetic, highly addicted to sugar, and just uncertain of, what do I do next here? My health is crumbling. And so I got very lucky. I found rock climbing. Rock climbing opened up this whole doorway to being able to really just be at peace with myself, but understanding how biologically I started to do that through breath practice and being mindful, a little more mindfulness. And all of a sudden it just led to my ability to heal myself from being pre-diabetic, help manage my ADHD, and put me on a whole other course of life that, it's been a beautiful journey since then.
It's interesting that you went through a lot of this a few decades ago, right? And now it's so prevalent. And I think it's a lot of people of our generation too, that were taught a certain formula and just to keep going and to keep pushing and to never stop and not care for ourselves. And self-care seems like a word that isn't like achievable for most of us. Like it just feels like something that, is for other people because we weren't taught that. So I think, first of all, I think kudos to you to recognize at that time in your life to make those changes.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found is that, we need people like you more than ever right now to help navigate this journey, which you navigated at a time, like I said, you're sort of like before so many of us needed this kind of help. And I really, really, really resonate with the whole sugar addiction thing. So tell me, you told me before we started how much sugar you were eating in a day.
Yeah. Not knowing it at the time, how obviously I knew there was something wrong, but didn't know how bad it was. But 92 teaspoons a day was my average. So, breaking that down into the types of foods I was eating, obviously it was a heavily processed food diet.
Yeah.
And it was just part of the mechanism of my brain's use of sugar as a way to keep me stuck in this looping pattern of thoughts that sabotaged my ability to be grateful with life and be connected to life. And, when I again, this idea of, well, what is it about rock climbing that did whatever it did biologically, having the ability to, in the moments of life that I am about to take an action that doesn't serve me, to have the ability to notice the relationship between my mind and my nervous system in that moment and use my nervous system to teach my brain to be okay, to feel safe, to feel loved. That's what changed my relationship to sugar. It's what changed my relationship to everything in life. But it required me being very mindful of the moments my brain was trying to create a stress response. And so you think like climbing, you're spending hours and hours and hours immersed in this relationship with your own stress response. Nobody does that. Like who spends time really trying to nourish that? Usually we're just stuck in our thoughts and life is just unfolding, and it starts to trip us up in certain areas. And unless we know that we can support the brain to let go and feel at peace, it's hard to fully embrace a life of being grateful.
As a former rock climber, mountaineer myself, first of all, I love that you were able to learn that through rock climbing. And there really is, I remember moments in my climbing journey when if you get out of where you are, if you're not present, how dangerous that can be. And also when your mind, for example, if your mind is focused on falling or you're not going to make it or the hold is too slippery or whatever, I mean, that comes true more often than not. And it's such a great example of how our mind works in that moment. And sometimes, like myself included, I forget that, that happened I could do that with rock climbing, and sometimes bringing it into the rest of my life is very hard. And, you say you turned this sugar addiction into a powerful source of love.
Yeah.
Was there something specifically that was a catalyst for you to take what you'd learned through rock climbing and apply it to the rest of your life? Because I think sometimes that's what's really hard.
Yeah.
We can do these really good things over here.
Yeah.
But on the rest of our life, we're still really struggling, and we're not able to transfer that information or that wisdom into another part of our life.
Yeah. And, this for me it kind of led to this idea of the 6 steps, call it the Unleash Your Energy Roadmap. And these 6 steps, essentially what I started to recognize is, so in climbing, I'm able to reset this fight or flight response. I started to recognize that feeling and realize, wow, this is what permeates in all the other areas of my life. I feel this anxious everywhere. So it got me into this idea of, okay, so step one being, you need to assess where you're being disrupted. Where is your mind right now creating patterns around your life? And these are the key themes. So there's 4 of them. There's your health, your relationships, your finance, and your career. Now, our mind tends to use those to keep us stuck in these triggered responses, because the brain, being a survival organ, loves the adrenaline as its main source of energy, the adrenaline from fight or flight. So, and this is what I do with all my clients. The first thing is we have to map those out. What is it that you notice in your life that's creating these disruptions? Obviously, sugar for me was one of those. And I realized, okay, so biologically, I'm resetting my nervous system in the moments when I'm climbing. It's through a very particular breath practice called Heartflow. And then I brought it into the moments where I was craving sugar. I said, okay, I'm going to now start to use the same practice I do climbing here in the kitchen when I'm about to grab the bag or box of cookies, particularly shortbread cookies. And I noticed pretty quick, having been told for years that, Adam, you should go on this diet and start this fitness program and do that, and every one of those left me feeling so frustrated and guilty and added to the stress. And now all of a sudden I found a way where I could just create a moment's pause with my brain's desire to get me to jump at the sugar, reset my own nervous system, and shift what was possible next. And I didn't have to eliminate the sugar just by creating the pause and shifting my own biology. It became easier and easier to let the sugar go and manifest more of what is in alignment with how I wanted to feel. And that's then the next steps. It's like step 2 is really starting to work with your mind in this way. Step 3 is shifting your ability to know how you want to be and how you want to feel in those moments. So how did I want to feel in the moments I was craving sugar? I had to get in touch with what that was so that I could replace the energy to be vibrating in that way versus just frustrated about that I'm about to eat sugar. And then it was really all about optimization after that. Once I understood that this is a nervous system game, and as I learned how to nourish my nervous system and my mind in all those different areas that I identified were triggers, I then started to be able to look at my nutrition, which is where the book came from, my sleep and my movement afterwards. And that's now you have your foundation in place. Now you can start to look at all the ways that you can optimize through our Western style of wellness. But if you try and do those beforehand, it's very difficult to do, and it creates a lot of stress sometimes. So this worked really well for me, and I've been living it for 15, 20 years now. And
helping serve clients in this way too.
Well, and so much of that came from the need for community. There's this beautiful energy that when you understand how to regulate yourself, this idea of the quantum field. So all of a sudden I'm regulating myself in a very beautiful way. And it's not about being perfect at this, but most of the time I'm in my parasympathetic nervous system state. That's a gratitude state.
Yeah.
And you feel it. You feel really fulfilled. But what it also does is it helps you co-regulate others. And we're in a time in the world where we need more and more co-regulation from those of us who understand how to regulate. And especially for us parents, if you have young kids, that's what allows your child to feel safe and feel loved. It's not your words as much as it is your expression in your nervous system through how you're feeling about yourself and how you're holding your nervous system for them to feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah, my goodness. And for your own inner child to feel safe too.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
how much are we, maybe you're a parent, maybe you're not, and you're listening right now, but we all have an inner child who's just begging to feel safe,
Yeah.
right? Especially if
Yeah.
you're in that Gen X where, we didn't grow up a lot with that safety, that thing from our parents where we originally had those attachment bonds and the safety from our parents. So
Yeah.
I think this can apply whether you have children or not. Okay, just to review for those that might need a bit of a reminder, you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned fight or flight, parasympathetic. Can you just review for people like what those terms are and what that means sort of in how our body acts?
Yeah. Yeah. And like I mentioned, I mean, in terms of the steps involved, without having to take notes during this, I do have that PDF that all your audience can grab through the website. But trying to make it make sense for me, having the knowledge or the language around what it is I'm discovering here, and as I started to really dissect what I was able to do for myself, it really came down just to the basics of it is understanding that my brain is always going after a source of energy. And until I can teach it to let go of the need for it to go after energy, and I could actually use my heart as the more powerful, energetic source of my being, it allowed my mind space to let go of, on average, we have 70,000 thoughts a day. So if we let that continue to run how we operate, there's no space for the heart to be present in that. And so as I utilize my breath as my primary access, it just opened up the heart to show the energy it wanted to guide with. And all I had to do was continue to be committed to noticing, and essentially the idea of being a student of my own behavior, and really honoring that and not getting lost in my mind's stories of myself. You mentioned this idea, and hopefully we're not going off too much here from your question.
All good.
You mentioned this idea of the childhood experiences and how the mind functions. There's an interesting thing that happens, I think, that's not talked enough about in terms of what does the brain do when a child has a stress response. And I know for myself, the moments I was diagnosed ADHD and told I was learning disabled, that gave fuel to my brain to create thoughts that I got lost in for a long time. And I think it's important that us as parents understand this when we label our kids, or when our kids have a stressful moment, they get yelled at, or they get bullied on the playground, or they have their first breakup. Their brain goes through this experience that is quite pleasing to the brain because it's a moment of fight or flight for the child.
Right.
So the brain likes to look at it. It says, okay, here's an opportunity. I can create an algorithm out of these thoughts that keeps us locked in those patterns. And for myself, self-esteem, self-worth, shame, and guilt were a large part of what took up my mind for a long time and led to my addiction to sugar and other things. And the importance is recognizing that, okay, so when we train our brain to feel safe and feel loved through the heart, through these practices, it opens up a doorway for us to have so much more space for presence to be where we live. But until we teach the brain this, we won't really fully understand what presence feels like. And again, that idea of connecting to gratitude as our dominant vibration, it's one that we just don't seem to fully be able to grasp.
Yeah, there's a beautiful connection between our breath and gratitude. And we cannot exist in that fear state, that fight or flight state, and in gratitude at the same time. And what I've learned is the easiest way to get into that gratitude state is to stop and to breathe and to remember where to breathe, how to breathe, connecting to our deep breathing muscles, getting out of the shoulders, coming up, the belly out instead, those kind of things. Do you have a short little, I don't know, I'm putting you on the spot, but a little breath sort of thing that our listeners could try? Maybe even in this moment, they might feel, this is bringing up some anxiety for them. So what would be a great way for them to connect back to their breath and their heart?
Yeah. Well, my breath practice that I discovered through climbing which is what I call Heartflow. And it's the primary basis for building a stronger foundation. All my clients, this is the number one thing that they learn when they come into our programs. And it's critical that we understand that this has to be something that's easy to do and fits our busy lives. Otherwise, it creates stress. So, and I'm not knocking meditation, but meditation was always a source of stress for me and was always difficult to do, although we know there's so much benefit from it. So this is, Heartflow you can look at as just bringing these really, really micro moments of meditation, of mindfulness, but you're doing it in a way that's training your vagus nerve to be in what's called coherence. And so it's a 33-second breath practice. You're doing 4 seconds in, 7 seconds out, 3 rotations, 4 in, 7 out, 4 in, 7 out. I put my hand on my heart. I close my eyes, and slowly go through that. The key to the resetting of the nervous system is in the rhythm of your breath. And as long as you keep a nice clean rhythm for all 3 of those, 4 in, 7 out, it will clean the vagus nerve up to create a beautiful connection to the executive function of your mind, and it will give you back your critical thought. And it'll help you feel peaceful.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so can we try it together and invite podcast listeners? I invite you that if you're listening to this, maybe you're walking or you're driving, find a place where you can pull over safely, or maybe just sit down. Maybe if you're walking, sit down on the grass, connect to the earth. And let's just take those 33 seconds together. I'm passing it to you to lead me through that.
Yeah. And if your eyes are open, that's fine. If you're driving, I'll do this in line at the grocery store, and, I'll be in traffic, and, I used to get road rage, and now it's a moment to breathe and connect. So yeah, let's dive in. So I'll count us through, and we'll start with the in breath of 4. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And last 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
If you're not smiling, I know you skipped this part, because I do feel like I just want to smile and like bring good energy back in from that moment. Ooh.
Yeah.
Thank you for that gift, Adam. That was so beautiful. I really appreciate it. And so easy. You mentioned about meditation, and I've been working on building my meditation practice and trying to do better with that for sure. Because like you said, there's definitely benefits to it. And sometimes I struggle with the racing mind and the repetitive thoughts. And even like you said, I had a streak on a meditation timer, and then it became stressful because I didn't want to miss using my meditation timer so that I would lose my streak. And I'm thinking to myself, this isn't really I'm sure this isn't what the app is about, right? I understand the benefits of like the encouragement of a streak and the gamification. And on the other hand, it was causing me a little bit of stress and anxiety because I didn't want to break my streak. So
I get it.
Right. Yeah. And we're type A personality, right? When you're goal setting and you're striving all the time, sometimes, worrying about a streak can get in the way. So,
well, it's funny because meditation is one that is so highly focused on as a main source of wellness, but yet my mind used it against me because it noticed. As soon as it started to create stress, the mind likes to, there's a pattern. I can start to use meditation as a way to trigger Adam. So that's, it's just being mindful that if we do not help the mind through that, it's going to make it a difficult thing to stick to. Yeah.
Now you have a lot of experience coaching. I know that in the past you worked more with corporate clients, but how are you serving people today through your coaching work?
Yeah, I mean, predominantly working with really busy parents, and got in it through a process. It's called the Unleash Your Energy Foundation, and it's a process of activating your nervous system in a way where your brain starts to support you, helps you feel more connected to your loved ones. But obviously, at the core, it's feeling more connected to yourself. And when you have that connection to yourself, it allows you to be that beacon of light for your kids, for your colleagues, for your family members, your community, the world. And it's a 3-month process, and it's very community oriented, where everybody supports one another and we're all in co-regulation together. And we know that there's a lot of isolation out there right now. There's a lot of loneliness, and the last 3-4 years has really ramped that up. Mm-hmm. And so, I think we're just at that time where community is such a critical part to our overall wellness and our ability to enjoy a very grateful life.
I agree with you on the community part. As someone who moved to Vancouver Island here off the west coast of Canada, and I know you're a BC person as well, but I live on an island, which I moved here, not long before the pandemic. I hadn't really built, all the communities that I'd started to build just shut down immediately. Mm-hmm. And it's only been in the past year or so that I've really felt this community connection through the people that I meet at sunrise at the beach. I'm a sunrise photographer, and I've been doing cold dipping, and those people have become my community. And I almost didn't realize how much I missed a community feel until I had it back.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it, is we forget how important as human beings having a supportive community is.
Yeah.
And I love that you're running your coaching in a way that community part is really in the forefront.
Well, it's everything. As you teach somebody to regulate their own stress response to life, it automatically, it needs that kind of support for it to be sustainable. Otherwise, the brain, it's powerful. If you're trying to do things alone, it's a very tricky and hard way to go.
Yeah.
And we know right now that again, that's what we need, and especially for parents. We need to have a little more resilience behind this so that we can be the best version for our next generations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not been an easy time for parents, especially those with, younger children that are still at home.
Yeah.
The past few years have been definitely challenging. So I love that. I love the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Adam, I would love it if you would share some of your personal gratitude practices with our audience.
Yeah. Well, there's the one that for me has been over the last 10 years, the most powerful is doing a practice of eye-to-eye contact with my daughter, and now my son, who's 8. And in that process, giving them the opportunity to tune into what my vibration of gratitude feels like. So, I have a lot of practices that I identify as having a vibration of gratitude, but that's the one that I specifically am focused on. The gratitude for my role as a father, my gratitude for having my kids in my life in this way, but knowing that when I do that with them, they're energetically contributing the gratitude back because they understand the practice. And there's something so powerful about that I highly recommend giving that one a try.
So what is it? You just sit with your child and do you say anything? Do you just look in their eye?
Yeah, no, we start in the morning before we get all the chaos of the day happening. And we intentionally just sit and look in each other's eyes, and there's no time frame on it, but usually it ends in a couple of big smiles or a giggle, or somebody does something silly, or the dog comes and starts licking our face, and that usually stops it. But it's more of letting it be. So first thing in the morning for sure, because otherwise it starts to disrupt that kind of energy right away.
Yeah. But
giving it the space to let it go where it wants to go. Sometimes it'll end in sharing some really beautiful things. And it's by far my most powerful and grateful practice we have.
Wow. Adam, I say this every time, but I have been doing this podcast for more than 3 years. I've interviewed probably 150 people, and I've never heard anyone share that before as a gratitude practice. So thank you for that. I just love so much how gratitude, there are endless ways to practice, and we can constantly be changing and adjusting the way that we express ourselves in a grateful way or connect in gratitude to others, because there are no rules around gratitude. There's no specific way you have to do it. It's just finding ways that work for you and the people that you want to connect with. And I am making note of that. Thank you so much. So we're wrapping things up, and you briefly mentioned you have a 6-step process that you're sharing with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you can get that on my website at clearimpact.io. And essentially it's called the Unleash Energy Roadmap. It's the 6 steps that all of my clients go through just to start to get in touch with what's possible. A fresh approach to living connected to more gratitude, but also the best version of ourselves possible. And we mentioned a bit of it earlier on the podcast, but the downloadable PDF goes into detail on each one, and you can see how it fits into your life.
Fantastic. I will be downloading and, looking for some guidance with my own sugar addiction. For those that know me outside of the podcast, it's something that, regardless of all the wonderful, beautiful lifestyle practices that I have, it is still something that I have struggled with. I can go through months without eating it, and then it comes back into my life, and I definitely still have this struggle. So I'm going to give some of these practices a go for myself. I'll keep you posted. Maybe I'll update the podcast audience in the next month or so and let them know how this is working for me, because I am definitely someone who very much struggles with this. So
yeah, I appreciate that, Julie. Yeah, and thank you for having me. I appreciate being on.
It's been wonderful. So thank you again, Adam Hart. You can find him at clearimpact.io. Thanks again for being such a wonderful guest here on the podcast.
Right on.
Thanks for sticking around till the end of the podcast. I appreciate you. If you're not already following us on your favorite app, make sure you click on the check or follow podcast so you'll be alerted every time there's a new podcast episode. If you enjoyed the episode and want to help us grow, here's some easy things that you can do. You can leave a review on your favorite app. You can share this podcast with a friend and send it directly. And you can also share through social media. Feel free to tag me on any posts in your stories and I'll repost. Thank you to Paul Tedeschini for doing the post-production audio for the podcast. And one last thing, I hope you're choosing to wake up with gratitude every single day.